ODOO Workflow Engine Demonstration. Since version 11, ODOO has completely removed the relevant code of Workflow Engine, Workflow and BPMN are short boards of ODOO. At present, most of some ODOO workflows on the internet are based on third-party workflow engines. The workflow module package presented to you today is completely based on ODOO and BPMN2.0, which realizes the visual graphic process definition and workflow-driven, hoping to provide a power tool for the developers of ODOO. The workflow module package shown today includes color selection component, BPMN graphical process definition module, workflow-driven engine and to-do task module. Let's show you the whole process of workflow from definition to driving. First, let's take a look at the workflow definition. Let's create a new workflow definition. We need set the main model of the workflow, and the form view, the list view, in order to show the workflow state of the following view. After the workflow record is created, we can start to define the workflow graphically. On the left side of the screen is the element panel, through which we can drag to add elements. We first add a start node and end node. And from the start node, add a task node, add a conditional gateway node, add 2 branches directly to the end node. We can also add some auxiliary information nodes, such as annotate an information, file, data description and other information. After defining the node, we can set the node attributes. For example, we can set the attributes of several nodes: fill color, stroke text, The nodes and transfers defined on the diagram will form corresponding records on the background workflow model. We can switch and look at the record in the background model. We can see that all nodes already exist, and the transfer is not complete. The main reason is that when defining the graph, the nodes before and after the transfer connection need to obtain the node ID to form a record. We can define a transfer with from node and to node by ourselves, or help us create missing nodes and transfers with the help of graph component self-examination. We can click the check and save button, and we can see that the transfers have been created. We can now define the transferred information. For example, for these 2 branches, we can define color and text respectively. After saving, let's look at the records in the background model. The automatically created records and the records we modified are all in the list. What we create is a simple workflow. A complex business workflow involves multiple departments and multiple roles. At this time, we can define a complex workflow through a Lanaset diagram. For example, we create a Lanaset, create another lane below, and specify the department name sales, product. In addition to defining the workflow ourselves, we can also define the workflow that conforms to BPMN2.0's workflow file was imported. Here we found a pizza ordering workflow file on the internet. I have saved it. Now let's import this workflow. Workflow import will delete all your original definitions. After confirmation, the workflow will be imported. The imported workflow will automatically create node information. Generally, the transferred information will not be created successfully. We can let the component check by itself and create missing nodes and transfers for us. During the inspection workflow, the elements without records will be marked red first, and the normal color will be restored after they are created successfully. The defined workflow can be downloaded or exported to SVG graphic file. Let's take another look at the workflow-driven demonstration. The workflow used in the demonstration is an actual workflow of maintenance. Business. In order to demonstrate the need, we slightly modify it and bind it to the original CIM business data of ODOO. There are 4 types of workflow-driven auto process. Need note. To-do task and event detection. Auto process is mainly used for conditional branching or conditional judgment of logical flow. Need note are mainly used for the processing of processes that need to be audited and give opinions. To-do tasks are mainly used for business processing. Event detection. Event fired, or interface call class, or non-real-time scenes that need to wait for results. These types such as payment completion event. In the later demonstration workflow, we will use examples to illustrate. Before the workflow is applied, it must be updated to the binding model inheritance view. This binding does not affect the original business model of CIM. Cancel the workflow button can undo the inheritance of the binding model and restore everything to the original state. We enable the defined workflow and bind it to the CIM model. Any modification of the workflow can take effect only after the workflow is updated. Now, let's go to CIM to see what changes have taken place. After the workflow is enabled, it has no impact on the original records. Let's create a new CIM record for testing. After clicking Enter, we found a workflow status bar on the record. The status bar will display the current node, the actions to be done, and the status buttons of Approve Log and Flow chart. The workflow status and stage can be set in the node definition of the diagram, and the order of each stage can be specified, whether it is explicitly displayed in the status bar or not. When the workflow is driven, the current stage is inserted into the status bar. In order to match the conditional branches in the workflow, we have defined several fields in CIM. Now specify their values: contract, no standby, sales, and then we start the workflow. After the workflow is started, the first state transition is an event deviation type. The display of waiting to win appears. Let's take a look at the definition of this transition. It monitors whether the state of the current record changes to win. It will flow down only when the event with the generated state changes to win occurs. The next few transitions are branches of auto process. Let's take a look at their transition conditions. If they meet the conditions, they will take this branch. In each transition definition, you can also specify the execution of Python scripts, server methods, and other operations. We switch to the CIM record and change its status. In order to win, we see that the workflow is driven to flow down and directly to the contract review. Let's see that in the process definition. Its transfer condition is need note type. This type does not need conditions. It will trigger to-do tasks. Let's see the to-do tasks. There is a to-do task. We won't introduce the function of the to-do task module here. We click action to see this business opportunity, and we conduct opinion review. In the review log, we can see all the previous flow processes, input opinions, and sign the approver. If the approver is added, all the countersigners will generate to-do tasks, and the workflow will flow backward only after everyone has completed the implementation. We submit directly and agree by default. We see that the workflow status has changed and the to-do tasks have disappeared. At this time, you are still in the review interface. Click the operating button again. The task has been processed, so you can only view it. At this point, we can check the workflow status and click the diagram button to see the flow process of the workflow and the instructions of each link. We see that the workflow goes to quotation. Let's take a look at this state transition type in the workflow definition. It is a to-do task type. From the perspective of parameter setting, it will open the sales order view, and the past ID is false, which means that it will create a new record. If there is an ID value, it will open the associated record. The context parameter will pass the default field value, which is associated with the main model record. The condition of task closing speed is that the sale order status is confirmed. Let's deal with this to-do task. We can see that a lot of information has been passed to the new sales order through context parameters. After the record is saved, let's look at the to-do. The task does not disappear because the task end condition is not reached at this time. As long as the status of sale order is set to confirm, it will speed up the task and trigger the backward flow of the process. Here, we better change this state manually. After the status changes, we see that the process flows backward. For the review of the following opinions, we intend to give objections and let the workflow go back and restart. In order to change the workflow to another state, let's slightly change the variables of CIM contract. No standby, maintenance, tower maintenance. We quickly skip the previous workflow. Due to different conditions, we can see that the workflow now goes to the repair order, and the following status transition has two branches. Let's look at the definition separately. In the node definition, we can see that this node has form field restrictions for different people. The phone and email are confidential and invisible to Willis users, but read only to demo users. Both users must enter the expected deadline date. Let's take a look at the two branches and specify the processing personnel respectively. If more than one person is designated or departments are designated at the same time. If the node's join mode is in, which refers to countersigning, and the flow will not flow down until all processing is completed. If the node's join mode is OR, which refers to rush signing, after anyone completes the processing, it will flow down. Let's go back to business processing. At this time, we log in as an administrator and can see two nodes. But there are no to-do tasks. We find two to-do tasks in the issued to-do list and send them to two designated persons respectively. Now let's log in with these two user accounts. First, log in with the Willis user. He can't see any clues or business opportunities from the rules. But there is a to-do. We will do to-do action. We see that the email and telephone information on the form are not visible, and the expected deadline date is a required item. We deal with it. Generates a new to-do, and we will deal with it. We note that the sender and receiver, in the flow definition, if the receiver is not specified, the receiver is same as the sender. In any link, it follows that the to-do is the transfer from the previous processor to the next processor. Enter the to-do list and click the diagram. We can see the flow status of this branch. We can change another user demo to log in and process another branch. To do. From the form, email and phone are read-only. Let's deal with the diagram and see the status of the flowchart. We see two different branches flowing. From this, we also note that the workflow supports multi-branch and multi-person parallel processing. Everyone sees their own to-do and processes their own branches. The traditional workflow engine mainly drives business execution through function-driven and audit control, which is mainly defined and presented in the form of strips, according to the business chain. On the basis of compatibility with the traditional workflow mode, the component package puts forward the idea of full business process driving, which shows another workflow mode. It combs all business processes of a company into a spider web structure, triggers the workflow node by the needs of customers or frontline, and the transaction drives the background business departments to cooperate to complete the work according to the defined mesh workflow structure. The workflow node not only processes the approve, you can also handle specific businesses and events. In this way, the whole business process-driven system design focuses on the business process panorama and specific business processing nodes. And the construction difficulty of the system will be reduced. If the business needs change, after identifying the nodes involved in the change points, we can achieve faster response through the minimum communication cost. The minimum change on the flow chart and less code development. This is also the original intention of the workflow framework design. Thank you for your listening. Finally, thank the components and authors we refer to.